Welcome to the American Security Council Protecting Our Freedoms podcast. The mission of the American Security Council is to educate and engage American citizens on national security matters, economic security matters, and the need for moral leadership in the United States of America. Please enjoy the podcast.
Welcome to Protecting Our Freedoms podcast. I'm your host, Joy Votrobek, here with my co-host, Mark Renehan.
How you doing today, Joy?
Good. How are you, Mark?
Excellent.
Good. Today we are going to discuss our senior fellow Alan Dowd's latest article, Japan Leading in the Indo-Pacific, a very timely subject. And you can view all of Alan's articles on our podcast and our podcast on our website at www.ascf.us. We appreciate your support to keep this podcast and all of our educational programs alive.
So anyway, you can also view all of our podcasts and all of our updates on events we're doing, our Avatar program, on our Facebook page, which is Protecting Our Freedoms, www.facebook.com/Protecting Our Freedoms with two S's. And we're also on YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, Instagram, all of the regular social media mediums. So without any further ado, welcome back, Alan. It is good to have you here. Thanks for coming out on a Friday.
I always enjoy talking with you, Mark, and Joy. It's good to be here.
Thanks, Alan.
Well, I'm going to think that Joy's going to kick it off. She has a couple of questions. We're going to discuss Alan's latest article, which can be viewed on our website. We'll have it up there on Monday along with our show. It is about Japan being a new ally of ours in the Trans-Pacific and the importance of that, and it goes into further detail. But Joy, I think you have a few questions.
Yes, Alan, it was a great article, and you went very much into details. So I'm going to talk first about you said that Japan is now one of our key Trans-Pacific allies, and my question would be, but Japan doesn't have nuclear weapons, and until recently, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there was a very small cap on their military spending. So if you could go and expand a little more on what your article was saying about why you believe Japan stepped up their game in the Indo-Pacific.
Well, first off, thanks for the kind words. I hope the readers enjoy the article as much as you guys on the team. But I would say that the starting point is the Japanese are not doing this for any other reason than provocations by two countries, mostly China, but secondarily North Korea. I don't talk much in the article about North Korea, but that's a very serious concern for the Japanese, which is why they invest so much in missile defense, and they're a great team member. They've co-developed some of the key missile defense elements with us. They host some key missile defense elements that actually help in our defense too. So part of it's North Korea, but the bigger part is China. The provocations really are numerous. The airspace violations, a defense ministry document in Japan that calls them relentless. Their sea space violations that China engages in. And then I also think, I can get into the numbers of that. It's about 58 airspace incursions a month. There's also China's using a Coast Guard and unmarked fishing vessels to violate sea space. But there's also the broader matter where the Japanese, maybe because they're closer to the situation, the Japanese citizens and Japanese government certainly recognize just the real threat posed by China's pushing outward in a way maybe that the average American doesn't, and maybe even the average American elected policymaker doesn't. But they notice and they see the danger of what could happen if China were to seize Taiwan, and as China continues to push and build these artificial illegal islands in the South China Sea, what the impact of that would be on international commerce, the international order in general, on Japan specific, and on the United States. And then you mentioned that I had mentioned that Japan's a growing ally. Absolutely. But as you know, and Mark, and all the ASCF team knows, Japan's been a treaty ally since the 1950s. Now we see Japan really ready to play a much more assertive role, which I think is a very good thing. I noticed, I made this point, I haven't seen other people make it, that if we are in the middle of the beginning of a new Cold War, I'm of the view that we are, we can learn a lot from the first Cold War. It's not a perfect parallel, but the Brits and the island democracy of Britain was kind of our our link, our bridge to the key theater in Cold War I, and the Japanese, the island democracy of Japan, I think will be a link, a bridge to the key theater of Cold War II.
That makes sense. And we talk a lot about the South China Sea, and I believe I read also that China was looking at the islands north of Japan, correct?
That's right. I mean, the Japanese, there's a whole number of small islands south of the home islands, north of the home islands, and even China. Japan has to worry about Russian incursion too, Russian airplanes. And in fact, there was a moment, I think 2 years ago, where Russian and Chinese planes together threatened Japanese and South Korean airspace, clearly in a coordinated effort. So, Japan really is a frontline state as the Chinese try to probe and test how far they can go and what exactly the allies, the democratic allies, will do.
Alan, I have a quick question. One of the things that I obviously believe that the United States has the most powerful military, and as we're talking about, the South China Seas and stuff, I know that in my personal opinion, one of the reasons why we are the most powerful military is our carrier fleet, which enables us to, transport our fighter aircraft to targets worldwide. I don't know if you're the right person to ask this question to, but does Japan have any aircraft carriers? I feel ignorant for not knowing this. I thought they might have one.
It's a very good question, and it's not an ignorant question at all. It's a great question, and it's actually a point of great concern for the Chinese, for the PRC, because the Japanese have decided to upconvert to what used to be called helicopter destroyers. They're going to upconvert, and they're actually done with one already, into full-fledged aircraft carriers that can deliver F-35Bs, which are the new stealth fighters, the amphibious we use it for our Marine Corps version of the F-35. And so, no, it's not a bad question at all, and it's really concerning to the Chinese, which is a really good thing. Anything that'll get them distracted or concerned is good. And again, it's not because they're trying to be provocative. It's because they're trying to be defensive and deterrent given what the Chinese are doing. So yeah, there's two of these coming online, and the Japan. In fact, one of them is being tested with U.S. Marine Corps F-35s right now as they go through sea trials.
Yeah, I noticed in your article, it stated, is it true that, because I had a little bit of an argument, and I think after reading your article, I have to call someone and apologize, because a friend of mine posted about a month ago on Facebook. It was one of those kind of, I won't get into it. It was a meme that was a little controversial, but it said on it, while America is doing XYZ, the Chinese Navy is now the largest in the world. And I thought that it used to be, and this is how, I guess, again, not to use the word ignorant twice, but that our Navy was larger than the next three. And then I noticed in your article that is no longer true. Is that the case? Is the Chinese Navy now the largest in the world?
Yes. According to all measures, they are the largest Navy in the world, which, they're above 350 now. We're right around 297, 298. The Navy puts out, I think, a monthly metric on that, and I think we're right around 298. The previous administration's plan was to get to 355. Doesn't seem to me that we're going to be able to get there. The problem I have with that, Mark, even, is that China's Navy is mostly, naval forces are mostly focused on one theater. Ours, which is the best Navy in the world without question, is spread around the entire world and involved in doing any number of missions and carrying out any number of missions around the world. So the arithmetic doesn't really add up, even if it's an ambidextrous Navy, and our Navy ships can do more today than a typical Navy ship could do in the 1980s or 1970s for sure. But which is all the more reason we need partners like Japan, Australia, India. The Brits are increasing their role there too, and others. And so that is correct. They have a bigger Navy than the United States.
How many, again, I hate to keep, I'm asking little kid questions here, but how many aircraft, I think the Chinese only have, one or two aircraft carriers currently?
Yeah, there's debate about that too. I believe they have two that can go to sea. Technically, by law, we're supposed to have 11 that can go to sea, but we don't right now. We have 10 that are able to go to sea right now. Uh, so, and China's aircraft carriers are a different kind of carrier than ours. Ours are truly super carriers. There's really only one country on earth that has the kind of aircraft carriers that we have, but which have a larger power projecting capabilities, and they can deliver more munitions, and they have different kinds of. But China's developing, and clearly, if a nation that develops an aircraft carrier wants to be a power projecting nation, full stop. I mean that's what China wants to do. I just read an article in which the U.S. commander of Africa Command, said that he's very concerned about the Chinese building bases on the western side of Africa, which would give them Atlantic coast naval ports and naval facilities, and that's a real concern for the United States.
And Alan, you talked about the incursions into Japan by China, and recently there's been a lot, as well as, I mean, the past year, I guess, or more. But Taiwan has been, they've really been stepping up their game there as well. 77, I think, in the last couple of days, they said. My question is, so, of course, I guess we all heard about the Chinese threatening Japan with nukes if they supported Taiwan. So my question is, how do you believe the U.S. would respond if China launched a nuclear strike against Japan for coming to Taiwan's aid?
There's no doubt in my mind that the U.S. would come to Japan's side. I would think would be obliged to respond in kind. That's a terrible scenario, but it's I think that you'd have to respond in kind against Chinese territory in that case with the same kind of weapon. A step back from that question, though, Joy, is the threshold question of what would the United States do in the event of a military assault on Taiwan. Japan is saying very clearly that Taiwan's the front line of democracy. Taiwan's security and Taiwan's sovereignty is tied up or connected to the sovereignty and security of the rest of the Indo-Pacific and the rest of that part of the Pacific. They're making very clear, they're not pulling any punches, making very clear that the maintenance of the free people of Taiwan is essential. And what is a question given within your question, Joy, is would Japan do anything on its own if the United States paused or hesitated to come to the aid of Taiwan? That's the real question.
That's a good point. Yes,
they've made very clear, by the way, that if the United States needed assistance in defending Taiwan, Japan would come to the United States aid as a treaty ally of the United States, not of Taiwan. And of course, I'm sure you guys saw just this week, you can't get much stronger signal than U.S. troops and boots on the ground. We discovered that American Marines and special operators have been in Taiwan for at least 12 months. That was reported the top front page of the Wall Street Journal. And I think that's a very good thing. And, over the last 10 years or so, we've had two administrations, the Trump and the Obama administration, did things like land a set of F-18s there because they had operational problems or mechanical issues, which was cover story, or port a ship there briefly to on Taiwan, sending a signal, or send high-level delegations of cabinet officials there. The Biden administration invited Taiwan's top diplomat to the inauguration, which was another signal. But to have U.S. troops on the ground, I think that's very important, training the Taiwanese, and the Chinese probably knew it before it was reported, but I suspect it was intentionally reported.
Yes, I know you and I talk about Taiwan before and what we would do in an event of China attacking them. But now Japan throwing in this that they are definitely going to come to Taiwan's aid if China were to attack. That's why I posed the question. I guess they're kind of holding us to that now.
Right. Well, that's the real question, and that's why I've said, you and I've talked about it before. I've written it for ASCF that I think it's time to end what's called strategic ambiguity of the Taiwan Relations Act, which governed how we dealt with Taiwan from around 79 until now, and replace it, with clarity that says this is what we'll do and makes very clear to Taiwan you should not declare independence, but makes very clear to Beijing that under no circumstances should Taiwan be absorbed by the mainland unless it's the will of the Taiwanese people. And which, by the way, that term in of itself is very interesting. The Taiwanese people, they don't see themselves as part of mainland China. They see themselves as a distinct and unique polity. They, it's a fiction. Taiwan has never been governed by the People's Republic of China, which is to say, it's never been governed by communist China. It's been part of China before, but not part of this China, and they have no desire to be part of a authoritarian regime.
No, I don't think anybody does at this point.
No,
so.
I think that's right.
Alan,
That's
do you see the Chinese becoming more and more aggressive in this Taiwan situation? Do you see them escalating it to the next level?
Well, the first part is the answer is in the paper every morning, Mark. Yes, they are. I mean, as Joy referenced, I think it's well over, she mentioned 77 incursions of Taiwan's ADIZ, Air Defense Identification Zone. I think it's above that now. They did some at night, which was a new wrinkle this week, which is a worrisome development. Some people say they're just doing that to voice their displeasure. Some people say they're doing that to emphasize their anniversary of PRC's birth. Whatever the reason, it's highly reckless, and it's belligerent. I don't know if it's an act of war, but it's certainly belligerent. But the next part of your question is China going to take that next step? Chinese open source materials say that they believe they can take Taiwan around or about 2025 at a fairly low cost. Very difficult to mount an amphibious invasion. It's very difficult to do under heavy fire, which it would be under. It's very difficult to seize a territory or an island or a country that doesn't want you there, as we've learned. But doesn't mean they wouldn't try. Doesn't mean they couldn't use any number of ways to do it. You've heard the term asymmetric warfare. I suspect they would start with cyber attacks. I suspect they would use indigenous cells that are probably already in Taiwan. I suspect that they would use merchant seamen that under the cover of cargo ships that would deliver special forces. I suspect they would blanket Taiwan's airfields with missile strikes. There's a lot of things they can do very quickly. It would happen before we could get there to help. That's why it's so important to make a clear message of deterrence. Don't do this. You can yell all you want. You can scream all you want. You can try to do X, Y, and Z all you want. But Taiwan is not for the taking. It's not going to be absorbed, even though that's what you think, Xi Jinping. That's not. Taiwan's not going the way of Hong Kong.
And with Japan stepping up now, it's even more of a deterrent.
Yeah, it's like peace through strength, our motto.
That's correct. It is Reagan. It is, again, the playbook that President Reagan leaves us is still relevant, and it will be as long as there are bad guys with weapons in the world, and that's going to be for a long time. So exactly, the peace through strength doctrine is. But maybe, Mark, since you mentioned that, we need to expand it a bit. The definition of it. It's peace through allied strength. It's not just going to be peace through American strength. We will still be at the front, but because of any number of structural issues here, because of our demographics here, it's a different kind of economic situation than it was in 1980 or 1985. Peace through allied strength. Japan's part of that. India's going to be part of that. Australia's part of that. Britain's part of that. Increasingly, we see much of NATO interested in China's recklessness, and we see, the Philippines reversing course and saying, please, we want the Americans to stay. We see Indonesia wanting help from Japan and the United States. We see the Vietnam opening its ports to U.S. aircraft carriers. These are big things that are happening, and strange bedfellows are caused by aggressive actions of parties like China. But we're going to have democratic partners in this effort, and I think we'll have some not so democratic partners too, like Vietnam and countries that maybe are moving toward that way. But Japan is going to be key.
Yeah, so Alan, you mentioned earlier that you believe that this may be a Cold War II with China.
Yes.
And, our original Cold War opponents was Russia, USSR. Do you feel that these are not the same, but are incredibly similar opponents in the Cold War? Is the USSR and China, are their governments that radically, or are they just two huge communist countries who we need to outspend, outdefend, whatever?
Well, I think, like you said, and like I referenced, it's not a perfect parallel, but the behaviors of these two hostile countries are similar. There's a lot of dissimilarities. You could list some of them right now. We were literally walled off from each other during Cold War One. The Soviets built walls, and we fortified defenses to keep each other separate from each other. They created their own, internal economy. Today, China and the United States are very much intertwined economically and a lot of other ways too. So there's some differences there, but the behaviors of these two countries, and I think the aims, the goals are similar. That neither the Soviet Union accepted or wanted to be a part of the post-World War II international order, and China does not accept or want to be a part of this international order. Xi Jinping says he very clearly wants to create a new, more just global order. That's his term, and he doesn't want to play by the rules that have been set developed over the last 70 years or so. They have very different view of everything from human rights to democratic governance, I guess you could say, and I think they're showing through their actions, the Chinese government, that they not just have a different vision, but they're trying to develop the means to pursue that vision, and that's the problem. It's not that it's big. It's not that it's going to be the biggest economy on earth again, which it was once before. It's going to be. This is China was the biggest economy on earth in the 1800s. It's going to be again. If it was a free China, that wouldn't be a problem. But if it's a China that is authoritarian and believes in this dominating centralism, that presents a problem for the free world.
Like we discussed last time as the threat to the liberal democratic order.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. It's I think, Mark, one of the biggest ways that they're similar is you can tell a lot about a government from how it treats its people. And the Soviet government was brutal to its people. The Chinese government is brutal to its people. It's not the old days. It's not ancient history. China today brutally treats its people. And a country that treats its people the way the Chinese regime does, the Communist Chinese Party, and the way the Soviet Union did, is going to break treaties. It's going to do things like misuse or abuse or make massive mistakes with things like the study of viruses. It's going to rationalize anything to get its ends, to get to its ends. It's going to seize foreign territory. That's just what countries that treat their people badly will do. They'll do anything because they prove that by how they treat their own people.
Yeah, no, I actually recently saw a video online. It was a Chinese citizen, and they had him in, I don't even know, some type of a torture chair. And his crime was, on Facebook, he was complaining about like the traffic cops at the circle. Yep. So for that, for just complaining on Facebook, he was arrested, put into this torture device, and whenever you hear people, oh, well, the Communist Party of China, I'm like, there's a million videos online you can watch to see what they do. So I would not want to side up with
most
them.
of our country be in serious trouble and torture.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like to bring up, we're a nonpartisan organization. We don't like to bring up politics. But one of the things, I'm originally from Boston, Alan, and I was telling the folks here is that I guess it was the Chinese independence, some communist holiday the other day. And in Boston, where I'm from, City Hall flew their flag over, the Chinese communist flag. And friends of mine were calling me just like, what is going on that people don't understand the, what the communism is about? Like that, I think we need more education so that...
That's horrific, Mark. That's really terrible. I mean, it's truly unthinkable that would happen, during the Cold War, though we do know that there were times when radical, usually mayors, not usually governors, but that did strange things that were pro-communist movements. The North Vietnamese come to mind, but it never ceases to amaze me the ability of people in the Western world, Americans, the free world, to believe everything and anything that's spouted out by a communist regime, but not use their brains when dealing with their own country. FDR said long before the Cold War, it's great for us to be soft-hearted, but we should not be soft-headed. And too many Americans are soft-headed. I mean, this is a regime. It's, you know, they're ordering involuntary sterilizations of Uyghur Muslims, involuntary abortions. They're bulldozing Christian churches and Buddhist temples. It's such a petty and pitiable regime. They literally, because you know, Christians, the cross is important. They're replacing the cross in some churches, the ones they don't bulldoze, with a picture of Xi Jinping. For Muslims, praying toward Mecca is important 5 times a day. So they put the PRC flag in the area where that person would have to pray towards Mecca in the mosque. So they do big and little things that are awful and petty. I mean, they literally have concentration camps. That's not made up. That's the UN has concluded that's what they've done. They put Christians, Muslims into forced labor, making things that sadly are exported to the West. You know, it's a brutal regime. And then this whole its ability to fuse technology and the power of the state together is Orwellian. You know, they're basically able to prevent people from traveling, prevent people from getting subway or train tickets, prevent people from their kids from going to college. You know, all based on some social credit score on what you said on social media, or what you said. To use your example, if you were angry about a traffic cop, or if you dared to say that something was mishandled in Wuhan, which happened. You know, it's a terrible, brutal regime, and its flag should not fly anywhere in the free world.
Well, and one last thing, and I'm going to give Joy a chance to talk and keep cutting her off. But I did notice that you corrected yourself earlier when you said the Chinese people, then you said the government. So I think it is important to mention to everybody that we're well aware here that, and as is Alan, I'm sure, that there are many great Chinese people over there who are just living their lives. But you have to do what you got to do.
Regime.
Yeah,
it's the regime. Yeah. When I talk about the Chinese, I'm talking about the regime for sure.
Absolutely.
That's right. And that it is the regime, and it'd be great if Xi Jinping would allow himself to the people to have a chance to, in a free election and fair election, if they chose him, that'd be a different word that I'd use. But they've not had that chance. And they're never going to have that chance.
No, I was going to say, I don't think there's going to be any election for him anytime soon.
Well, Alan, Mark, we could sit here and probably talk about the communist Chinese regime all day, but let's circle back to Japan. If I have another question, final question for you on that. Do you believe that Japan can be an Indo-Pacific leader and deter China without having nuclear weapons?
Well, I think that's a $1 million question. You know, Japan is one of those handful of countries on Earth that literally, with the flick of a switch, could go nuclear because of its technological capabilities, its resources, its wealth, and it's just its capacity. And it doesn't want to do that right now. There are people who are in the Japanese government who have talked about that might be necessary. That some people think is kind of the last card that Washington has to play, which is if the Chinese want to really dance and they don't want to rein in North Korea, that the Americans say, okay, the South Koreans and the Japanese, maybe it's time for you to have your own nuclear weapons, which would probably terrify Beijing. But that's a $1 million question. I do think that here's what I think, in concert with the United States, which, as Mark said, is the greatest military power on Earth, and India, the largest democracy on Earth, and a military power of growing clout and of deepening connection with the United States and with Japan. By the way, it was just announced this week that Indian Air Force top-of-the-line warplanes are going to go train in Japan alongside Japan's top-of-the-line warplanes. That's a big deal. But these three partners, and then Australia, these are part of called a new security formation known as the Quad. I do think that those four partners, geographically placed, all share the same values, basically, all see the same threat. I think that they can deter China. You have help from key partners in Europe. I think that's important too. I do think they can without Japan going down the nuclear path. And I don't think the new prime minister, his name's Kishida, I've never heard him talk about that issue. That's kind of the people who've talked about it inside Japan's government are usually low-level, not cabinet members, but people who are a member of the parliament, but not people inside the government, inside the cabinet. But that's the real million-dollar question: is would they have to do that? I can tell you this, Joy: if America continues this path of kind of pulling back and receding from the world, basically that could force countries like Japan and South Korea to do that just for their own self-protection, because they may fear that the U.S. nuclear umbrella is not dependable.
That's a good point. And yes, I would agree with you what you're saying, that the key thing is allies, it sounds like, all over. For us, for Japan, and the Quad, as you mentioned, and India does have nuclear weapons, so.
Yes, it's a nuclear power, and India and China have gone to war before. Just last summer, there was a skirmish that killed dozens, it sounds like, on both sides. They distrust the Chinese deeply and understandably, but they're right on the border with China, literally another frontline state, but deepening ties with the United States that really began under President Bush 43, and they've really accelerated since about 2002, 2003. United States and India really started working together a lot on counter-terror issues, and then moved closer and closer, had training operations on the ground in India. President Obama continued that. President Trump deepened it further, and it's clear now that it's deepening with President Biden. India's leader was just in Washington with President Biden and the Japanese and Australian leader for the first in-person meeting of the Quad leaders. So that's, and now we hear news that the British might be interested in joining the Quad. We just heard, 2 weeks ago, that Australia, United States, and Britain formed a new security partnership based on technology issues, nuclear submarines and such. These countries are all doing this, by the way, not to provoke anyone, but in response to constant provocations by China.
Oh, this has been a good show today.
Yeah.
So I have one last thing, and I know we've been going a little bit long today. I wanted to ask you. So we were talking about this earlier. So, like, for example, Alan, recently we did a Remembering September 11th, 20 years later. And as you know, the September 11th kind of slogan is never forget, whatever.
Yeah.
So we were just talking. I mean, there was a point in time when we literally evaporated 2 Japanese cities. Do you think there is anyone over there that still may hold some grudge over that? Do you have any concerns that there may be, Joy and I were talking, I'll never forgive Al-Qaeda for September 11th. Doesn't matter how many years pass or how many treaties or how much ally they become. Do you think that there's any of that over there? Or, I mean, there has to be, right? A little bit?
Well, I'm sure there are individuals, there are people who are of that generation who will never forget. There are people who are of the generation after that who can't forget that, and people who know history in general who can't forget how that war ended. But I do think that's counterbalanced by just the fact that America has been a good friend, and that started, as you probably know, Mark and Joy, really right when MacArthur's troops landed. MacArthur diverted millions of dollars worth of food to deal with a famine that was caused by the end of the war, not by us, but just by the end of the war and the country being a collapsed country. He obviously helped rebuild and wrote a free liberal constitution. So it starts then, it continues into the 60s, 70s, 80s, and then you think of things like that terrible earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear disaster that happened, the cascading catastrophe, I think, of 2011. And the first country there was the United States, Operation Tomodachi, which means friend. And the Japanese government, the Japanese people said this is who was there first for us. Those 58,000 American troops weren't pointing their guns at China or North Korea at that point. They put their guns down and started helping the Japanese people dig out from that catastrophe. So I think those memories are counterbalanced by those other things that the Americans have done, and the fact that America is a protector of Japan and helped rebuild Japan and helped it become an economic powerhouse and refocus its energies and talents from being from the warlike regime and the militarist regime of Imperial Japan to the free country it is today. So just in the same way, Mark, that my grandfather, who was a World War II veteran, both of them were at D-Day, did not fight on that side of the earth. He didn't like that I bought a Honda. in my first car was a Honda because it was a Japanese car. But I told him how much I paid for it. And I told him how good of a car it was, and he says it is better than the Ford I've got. And he laughed about that. I mean, just more dependable. But
I had the same problem with my family when
I was going to say,
Honda.
Alan, I had the exact same issue with my grandfather from World War II. The exact same
there
one.
There you go. So we can see it from the other side of the coin, I think, and generations, as those generations emerge, new generations emerge, they see a different view of the other country, and I think that happened with Americans as well, because we remember how that war began. FDR
exactly.
FDR said, "Never shall we forget the nature of this attack." They literally gave us the announcement, of ceasing relations and that we were beginning hostilities while the planes were headed back to their carriers. So they'd already done the first raid. I mean, that's how treacherous the attack was. And I'm 50. I wasn't around in 1941, but I remember that, even though I wasn't there to remember it. So, but I do think that the vast majority of Japanese people see us as their closest ally.
No, and it's strange that back in the World War II, the Chinese were our ally, the Japanese were our enemy, and
that's right.
Maybe in World War III it's going to be reversed. I'm kidding. We're not going to have any World War III.
Well, think about it, Mark. It happened much quicker than that. We were with the Soviets throughout those 4 years of the war for us, and by 48. Patton said in 45.
I was just
by 48, it was not. They were our main enemy, and the Cold War was on.
I was going to. We are the same age, Alan, because I was about to say, what did Patton say when he was over there? I'm already over here with all my tanks. Why don't you let me take care of these Soviets now? So.
That's correct. That's right. But cooler heads prevailed. But it's so I do think history and time does have a way of healing wounds, but also actions. I mean, our actions. The fruit of our words is in our actions with Japan, and they for us too. I mean, they stood with us. They helped us in Afghanistan and in Iraq. They weren't attacked on 9/11. The Iraqi regime wasn't a threat to them, but the Japanese helped us in both those places and many others. So, and now here they're leading, and I think they're leading the way. And I think we should get right shoulder to shoulder with them.
Absolutely.
Yes, we agree.
Well, Alan, we have kept you on the phone longer than we usually do, so I want to thank you very much for all of you watching. You can check out our shows on our Facebook page, which is Protecting Our Freedoms, Instagram, YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, and our website, of course, www.ascf.us. Joy, I'm going to let you take this
and
out.
Alan's articles can be found under the article section. Dowd.
It's been a long show.
It has. But Alan, we thank you again for coming on today. And next week,
Always
Mark.
enjoy it.
Yes, next week we are beginning our
what?
humanitarian crisis in Cuba broadcast series. I'm not losing it too. But we are beginning that series next week. Next Wednesday at 3 p.m. will be our first episode, and we will let you know more about that on Monday.
Very good. Enjoyed it as always.
All right, Alan, thanks for being here, and thank you all for watching. Talk to you all soon. Have a great week.
Please join us the next time as we bring you the stories on protecting our freedoms.